This is the Becoming Muslim podcast at untoislam.com, the show that helps people convert to Islam, with hosts from the US, UK, and Australia.
Women are still coming to Islam faster than men, and they're sticking with Islam. They're more likely to stick with Islam. Women are more likely to explore Islam, more likely to be practicing Muslims than men, more likely to have more knowledge than men. If you don't know how to, I think that's one of the things that new Muslims need to learn almost right away is where to get your knowledge from, how to accept it. Islam is a vast ocean of knowledge. There's so much to take in and so much to learn. And there's so much material out there, and it's really hard to navigate what to look at when you first become Muslim. And even now in the United States, there are women who are teaching classes that are just leading the way. And we don't really see that in the mosques the way that we should.
Islam has never had anything against culture. It has always allowed for people to keep their culture as long as it doesn't interfere with what Islam has to say.
And I think that is the advantage that a convert has versus someone that was born into the religion. You know, we come in, we're brand new babies. We're only exposed to the religion. We're not exposed to growing up with all the cultural aspects.
There has been a really big problem with the Muslim community because, unfortunately, a lot of the older generations, they learned Islam as more of a household habit rather than from a more scholarly perspective. For me, at least historically, it makes sense why women were much more involved and why in certain communities now they're not as involved, because they already have a support system outside of their community. I definitely can see a lot of convert women or women who are not a part of that ethnicity having these difficulties in those types of areas because they feel excluded. In the past, I think a lot of women were more involved in the mosque because also they had household help. They had their parents, they had their sisters and brothers. And I think just the way it worked before with women having children and how they were taking care of those children, it was much easier than it is now, where a woman has to be everything. She has to be the mom, the wife, the cleaner of the house, the cook, and everything in between. It's wrong to exclude them, but also I think to think that every woman will go to the mosque every single week or go 5 times a day is a little impractical because of the different duties that women have.
Welcome to the Becoming Muslim podcast at untoislam.com. This is the place where you can get all the information you need about the topic of converting to Islam. Today we have a special guest. Her name is Kadija Castriba, and she's going to share with us a literature review that she wrote. And the title is American Muslim Women, Their Relationship with American Mosques. So welcome to the show, Kadija.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So this is actually your second episode with us.
Yes.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, the first episode, I'll put the link to it in the show notes, and that was her story of how she converted to Islam. Okay, a little bit more about Kadija. She converted in 2004, so that's about 18 years ago. She grew up as an army brat, born on a military installation in West Germany. It was the middle of the Cold War, and she moved frequently between the US and Europe. For several years, she was a pharmacy technician until she decided to go to college and pursue a degree in economics. And she's currently a junior at Penn State. She's an avid reader and she loves crochet, and she currently lives in Pennsylvania. And she's also very dedicated to helping new sisters, helping new Muslims, helping them to come into Islam.
And find new resources and guide them through different aspects, because I know when I became Muslim, there was no YouTube, no internet, the internet was just a brand new thing. So it's a wild world out there. Like I tell a lot of the new sisters, Sheikh Google is the best sheikh and the worst sheikh you will ever find.
Yeah, that's something that I had to work out as well. So how do you help these sisters? Do you have some group or platform that you do this on?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways that I try and help the sisters. There's a class on Saturday where I meet with some new sisters, and there is an Arabic teacher there that's helping them learn Surah Fatiha, and then I try and provide resources, books, and educational websites to help them understand the meaning and the different aspects of their Aqidah, which for anyone that needs to know what that is, it's like the rules and the aspects of our faith. So because when you become Muslim, you're given the basics, the 5 daily prayers. We believe in one God, but Islam is a vast ocean of knowledge. So there's so much to take in and so much to learn. So, and there's so much material out there, and it's really hard to navigate what to look at when you first become Muslim, especially since so much of it is so intellectual. How does a new Muslim take it all in? So I try and help the sisters that are navigating, the new world. How do we get beyond the 5 pillars and go to the next level and really learn to connect with Allah? At least I hope so.
So what's the biggest problem you see with the new Muslims? What's the biggest problem that they're facing?
I think the biggest problem that new Muslims face, like I said, Sheikh Google is a huge problem, because he can give you the best information, but he can also give you the worst information when it comes to our religion. And if you're new to the religion, you don't know what is true Islamic knowledge and what is fabricated Islamic knowledge. And you don't have the tools when you first become Muslim to understand which is which. So it takes some time to navigate all of that. And if you don't know how to, I think that's one of the things that new Muslims need to learn almost right away, is where to get your knowledge from, how to accept it, where are the best places. And I always recommend starting with books, authentic books written by authentic scholars. Those will never lead you the wrong way. There are many reputable publishers like Dar es Salaam and IIPH are good places to start to find some excellent books. Because again, you can get lost in a book as well. There are some books that are very difficult to understand, and there's some others that make the religion very easy to understand. And especially when you're a new Muslim, there's so much terminology. Digging through all of the terminology, and trying to figure out what's this and what's that, and what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong. And then going to the masjid, the mosque, which is our place of worship, and figuring out if I'm doing the right thing there or if I'm doing the wrong thing. And you don't want to offend anyone, but you just want to learn, and you don't even know the questions to ask. I think that's the biggest challenges that I think new Muslims face.
Yeah, great. And then you mentioned the topic of, how to deal with visiting the mosque the first few times and not knowing what to ask. So this is tightly coupled with your literature review. And I would like you to just give us a summary now, a quick summary of what you wrote in this review. So again, the topic is American Muslim women, their relationship with the American mosque.
Well, one thing that in the United States, here's a couple points that I wanted to bring up. In the United States, American women are responsible for most of the domestic duties in the home and the mental load of that responsibility. And that's for all American women. And there is a gender gap when it comes to pay. And it is the same for Muslim women. There is no difference between a Muslim woman and the average American woman when it comes to that. Research shows that the system of patriarchy is in all faith structures. So also research shows that this exclusion often leaves women voiceless when it comes to congregational matters. And that goes in contradiction to what Islam teaches. If you look at Islamic history, some of our greatest scholars are Muslim women. Aisha bint Abu Bakr, one of the wives of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she is one of the foremost scholars. She's one of the most authentic and, how do I say this? She gives some of the most detailed rulings on Islam that are available to us. And she's a wealth of knowledge. And there are also other women like there's Fatima, who started a university in Morocco, and just women throughout the centuries have been wonderful examples of strength. And even now in the United States, there are women who are teaching classes that are just leading the way. And we don't really see that in the mosques the way that we should. But at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, women were welcomed and encouraged to be part of mosque life.
Yeah, so you're telling us about the place of women in Islam. And so can you tell me the difference between the way modern day Christianity have it, and the way modern day Islam have it with the place of women in their congregations?
Yes, the best way I can explain it is, so I come from a Catholic family, and my uncle is a priest. He's been a priest for the last 40 years. And I talked to him about this. He's been in charge of many parishes during his time. And we discussed the women in his congregations. And he said, even though women don't always have a leadership role in the Christian churches, they are more likely to attend the church than men are. They're more likely to be involved in community activities, such as volunteering and doing the activities that the church needs to function, such as teaching Sunday schools and cleaning up after community functions and fundraisers. And these are just things that are not happening for women in American mosques. The Muslim women are not given these same opportunities. And it's kind of sad because people that do attend a religious institution are more likely to volunteer in other community activities like homeless shelters and food banks. And they're also more likely to be involved in political engagement, which is really important in today's day and age.
Okay, and so why is it that you think that this is happening in the mosque? Why are they not given the opportunity?
I think it's cultural. I think a lot of it has to do with cultural, especially in my area. I live in an area that is mostly first generation immigrants. And I was also listening to a lecture just recently where a imam discussed the same problem. What happens often is people come to an area and they establish a mosque, and they want the mosque run a certain way. And then another group will be unhappy with the way the mosque is run, so they will establish another mosque. And then another group will splinter off and start another mosque. And unfortunately, they bring their culture with them. And a lot of the cultures that have come to the United States, including the Western culture that women are beneath men, often leave women in a submissive or excluded, or often leave women submissive or excluded from mosque opportunities. In the East, there's something called the female burden, where having a girl is something to be ashamed of, and that's something that still exists even in Pakistan and Afghanistan today. And even in Western society, there's a lot of, again, women stay at home, do the dishes, bear the children, don't go to work. And unfortunately, some of that translates into the mosque, where women need to stay home and not go to the mosque.
Okay, I just want to introduce Nawal now, and we'll continue on the topic of culture. So, Nawal, welcome. I just noticed that you just joined the call.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Peace be upon you as well. Thanks for coming.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, so for our listeners out there, Nawal is our expert on health and Islam. She's done many episodes with us, and today she's going to join in with the conversation. Just on the last topic, we've been talking about culture. So could you give us your views on culture in Islam and how it has affected and how it pushes people away from Islam?
Islam has never had anything against culture. It has always allowed for people to keep their culture as long as it doesn't interfere with what Islam has to say. We also have to remember that Islam has a lot of different types of rulings, or not different types, but more so it allows for a lot of variety. So, of course, some people can pray with their hands on their chest. Some people can pray with their hands down. I just mean in that type of sense where you can do things many different ways. And when it comes to the context of culture, it allows for people to be able to retain that culture by being able to find that sweet spot where they can keep their culture and also be religious at the same time. As far as certain, unfortunately, cultural ideas go, there has been a really big problem with the Muslim community because, unfortunately, a lot of the older generations, they learned Islam as more of a household habit rather than from a more scholarly perspective. It's that concept of being born with something and not really recognizing what it is versus accepting something later. And that also includes the younger Muslim generations in the West, because they've definitely been exposed to different cultures, different religions, different ideas, and therefore they're forced to find their way of what they believe in and accepting Islam in a context that they can utilize in the real world or in this mixed world that they live in. Whereas a lot of our parents or a lot of the immigrant population that migrated to the West, they've never really had to do that, because when they lived back home, everyone was the same in their ideas. And then when they move to the West, they often create their own little bubble of people who speak the same language as them and have the same kind of cultural ideas as them. So even if they're working at companies or being exposed to non-Muslim people, they don't really feel that forceful push to prove themselves as being American. Whereas I think the younger generation does feel that because they are American. I can personally say that I, on a daily basis, feel that, where I have to prove my Americanness, even though I was born here. But at the same time, I have to also prove my identity as a Muslim. And it's a very challenging thing. So you have to really know your stuff in order to be able to navigate that world and really question everything. Whereas I think a lot of the older generation didn't have to do that as much.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully today we can sort of get to a point where we might have a solution for our listeners out there, because I have a feeling that this problem of women not being able to contribute to the mosque in the way they like, it could be a reason why people are entering Islam and then quickly leaving Islam too. So, Kadija, you were just talking before about the cultural aspects and how it's a problem. Do you see them as un-Islamic?
No, I don't want to say that I see them as un-Islamic. In fact, I agree with Nawal that you can celebrate your culture while still being Muslim. Absolutely. You just have to recognize that culture and your Islam are two different things, and not always, they don't always mesh. So it's always best when you attribute something to your religion that you make sure it actually belongs to your religion and not something to your culture. And I think that is the advantage that a convert has versus someone that was born into the religion. You know, we come in, we're brand new babies. We're only exposed to the religion. We're not exposed to growing up with all the cultural aspects. So we have the advantage of only seeing not the pure Islam. You know, we don't get all the cultural baggage that comes along that many Muslims do. I've known that even in my own relationships with other sisters who have started studying their religion and had to learn to let go of things that they thought were pure Islamic beliefs. I have yet to take a class, an Islamic studies class, with a sister that has been a lifelong Muslim who said, "Oh, I didn't know that wasn't something I wasn't supposed to do." But alhamdulillah, you know, having an open mind and is really important. As for coming up with a solution, alhamdulillah, it'd be great if we could solve this problem in an hour, inshallah. But if we could make a start, it would be absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the start is for people having the knowledge. So, you know that when they enter Islam, they have to have realistic expectations. You know, we don't want to paint this picture of everything is going to be fine. And so I like to be able to tell people the problems and get them thinking about how they have to deal with it.
But I do want to say one thing that came up in my study and in my research in this is, despite these issues, women are still coming to Islam faster than men. and they're sticking with Islam. They're more likely to stick with Islam. Women are more likely to explore Islam, more likely to be practicing Muslims than men, more likely to have more knowledge than men, at least in the United States. The research shows that women are doing all of this in spite of their exclusion from the mosque. They do this in spite. They work, they want this. Islam, they don't look at what is happening at the mosque as something that excludes them from their religion. So alhamdulillah for that.
Yeah, I do want to comment about one thing that Kadija said about converts having a more pure understanding of Islam, which I think a lot of people forget. We all have a cultural background, and the way we analyze and understand things is led by that cultural background. So in many ways, yes, I would say the convert community may be more open-minded because they're viewing it as we are learning something new. And also that's a part of the Western mentality, is to be more open-minded and to accept things in a little bit more of to accept things a little bit easier than people from immigrant populations. But at the same time, I think it's a misunderstanding to say that converts have a more pure version of Islam, because there's a lot of things in Islam that, as I said, we're offered variety in. And I think that a lot of people forget that we also have a Western cultural aspect that we're bringing to our understanding of Islam. And a clear indication of that, for example, is that Islam allows for 4 women for a man to marry 4 women. And I feel that in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Qatar, if this happened, people would be much more accepting of that. And on the contrary, if it happened in the West, people would not be as accepting. And at the end of the day, they're both allowed. You can have 1 spouse or you can have 4, but we generally would lean more towards the 1 because our culture promotes more monogamy. And even Islam, there's like I think it's a lot more of a idea of, if you choose this path, then there's also these conditions. And if you choose this path, there's also these conditions. We could also say the same about childbearing, that Islam really promotes for a woman to be more with the children and involved in the raising of the children. But in Western cultures, that doesn't happen as much because, unfortunately, we do need to work in order to be able to sustain a home. And I think a lot of Eastern people look down upon that. At least I can say that, the people that I know who are Eastern, they really look down upon me being a working woman, because they feel like I need to be at home married and to be completing half my faith by being married and having children. So it really isn't so much that people who are new to the religion have a more pure idea of Islam, because they also are viewing Islam through their own cultural background. But it's more of, they might be a little bit more open to things in a different way, and that they may feel a bit more forced in some way to change, because their whole journey to Islam was about self-improvement and about finding faith. Whereas a lot more of the Eastern cultures that are born into it, for them, it was, as I said, once again, a household habit. So I do want to mention that.
Okay, Nawal, I want to ask you now. So when a person or a woman visits the mosque for the first time, and the thing that's going to probably upset them the most, if anything, is that this topic about segregation. So, Nawal, can you give us a bit of background about why is there such an emphasis on segregation at the mosque?
So originally in Islam, we always had the concept of men praying in the front and women praying behind. And it was simply because in Islam, we don't really have mixing of the genders in a physical way. Of course, you can talk to someone of the opposite gender and, have contact with them and all that kind of stuff. But we do have a culture of, men kind of having their brotherhood circle and women having their sisterhood circle, and of there being a clear divide in the interactions with the opposite gender. In Islam, I think also a big part of women praying behind and men praying in the front was also a biological thing, because obviously by having women being behind, there is, number one, less distraction for men, with women, in the context of if women were in the front. And also, I think there's a comfort level for women too by being behind, because if women are like breastfeeding children, or also when they come to the mosque with their kids, there's more of an ability for them to have space for themselves where they can feel comfortable to be able to tend to their kids or do things as a mother or a woman, if there's more segregation and a space for them. I would like to say that now, a lot of the mosques have adapted this idea of the curtain, of building a curtain in the mosque. So men being in the front, the women being in the back, and there being a curtain in between. This has historically never existed, but I think it's a little bit more of a cultural thing that has happened because the idea of the niqab, which is the face covering, has been introduced. And I think it offers women the comfort to remove the niqab and be able to pray without having an open barrier with men. Also, I can personally say a lot of women in the community I grew up in really wanted a curtain because it made it easier for them to breastfeed their children while also being able to interact in the mosque. Because if they didn't have the curtain and they have their kids screaming or crying, or newborn babies that need consistent tending to, it makes it much more uncomfortable to have an open barrier where, men might be watching them, or they have to feel more anxious about if their kid cries and people look behind to see whose kid is that crying. Whereas when there's a curtain, they can kind of tend to that much more easily and be able to feel free enough to breastfeed their children in around other women. So it is in many ways cultural, but it's also not. I think a lot of people think it's from a perspective of oppression, but rather it's more from a perspective of helping women to actually come to the mosque more and be involved more by offering them comfort.
And while I totally agree with you, Nawal, that it has been set up as a system of comfort, and there's a lot of mosques in the United States that practice it in that way, studies have shown, especially through the mosque survey, that there are a number of mosques that exclude women completely and do not offer any space for Muslim women to participate. I believe it's 23% of mosques have no space for women at all, which is
no, absolutely. And I do think that that is a problem, and a part of that is cultural as well, because not every country, but in certain countries or certain parts of certain countries, women are expected to.
In certain parts of the world, women are completely excluded from the mosque, from mosque life. When I did my research, there were women who said they never knew that they were allowed to attend the mosque. Like, I have been fortunate to travel overseas, to the Middle East, and the curtain does exist in places like Palestine and Jordan, where women do have are segregated but are still able to see the imam and hear the khutbah, which is the sermon, and be part of mosque life while still maintaining their modesty and able to remove their niqab. Whereas some of the women that I interviewed during this research told me that they had never been to a mosque until they came to the United States because they had always been told they were not allowed to go to the mosque. So, and the situation also arises, and this is a fact too, men are obligated to go to the mosque. There is an obligation on men to go to the mosque for prayer and for the Friday prayer, especially, where that obligation on women does not exist. So if you are in a smaller community and you have to build a mosque, it makes sense that you're going to build the men's area first and the women's area second. Unfortunately, though, what happens is all resources go to the men and no resources go to the women. So not only is the prayer area neglected, but so are the restrooms and the area for purification and the other community areas inside the mosque, to where the men's area is completely furnished with new rugs, new Qur'ans, new speaker systems, and the women's area is basically a closet, which is truly unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. I do think there are, certain cultures or certain communities that completely exclude women. And, some of them, it is just that women should be staying home, and they literally take the idea of it is better for women to pray at home as more of a fard, meaning obligatory, and that they should not be a part of that community. But in other communities, so for example, the community I grew up in, women were allowed to come to the mosque, but honestly, there were just some women, and often there were a lot more women who just didn't even want to come because it's hard to come with kids. It's hard to come and change and get ready and get the kids ready to go to the mosque and pray when you can just do it in the own comfort of your home. I think in comparison to men who obviously have jobs from 9 to 5, and then, they are basically free after that time to do things from a biological point of view. I'm not saying that they can't help in the house. I'm saying more that children generally rely more on the mother to do things for them. And I think it makes it really difficult for women to be a part of a community and like that, where they have to go and actually get everything prepared for them to take the kids to the mosque. We have to remember that we're living in a time where community raising of children has pretty much been eliminated. In the past, I think a lot of women were more involved in the mosque because also they had household help. They had their parents, they had their sisters and brothers. And I think just the way it worked before with women having children and how they were taking care of those children, it was much easier than it is now, where a woman has to be everything. She has to be the mom, the wife, the cleaner of the house, the cook, and everything in between. So it does, and I think that's really a big reason why Islam even says that for a woman to pray at home, she gets a lot of good deeds for that, not in a way of making her feel excluded from the community, but more to just say, as a woman who's most likely going to be busy with these things and may not always be able to be a part of the physical Islamic, community in the mosque, you have the same, like Allah views you in the same way. We also have to remember that generally men, even from a Western perspective, men, they are less likely to engage in asking for help and having more of a connection with men than women are. So women, they receive help from their mothers and sisters and, aunts and grandmothers and everyone else. And I think women are often more likely to have friendships and have other women that they connect with and build relationships with. Men don't. And I think that that is a part of the wisdom of Islam, where men are obliged to go to the mosque because they're forced to interact with other men. They're forced to have relationships with an imam or the people that they're praying with every day, so that when they have these emotional difficulties or life difficulties, they have a community that they can actually rely on because they've been building a relationship with them every day. Statistically, men in the US are at the highest rate, middle-aged men in the US are at the highest rate of suicide because they don't have friends. And if they're not married, they have no one that they can talk to. So we have to remember as well, it's a nature related thing that, men need it a little bit more, and women, they also need a community, but I think that they're more likely to seek a community, even if they don't have it through a physical institution like a mosque. That doesn't mean women shouldn't be going to the mosque. Obviously they should, but it's wrong to exclude them, but also I think to think that every woman will go to the mosque every single week or go 5 times a day is a little impractical because of the different duties that women have in a community. And I personally, I don't even have children, but I can say as a woman myself, I rarely ever go to the mosque. And it's just because of the time that I have as a working woman, also the time that I have to give to my community because I'm so engaged. And also sometimes it's also biological things too, the way, women go through a menstruation cycle, it does affect their day-to-day interactions and their day-to-day activities, even though we've been raised to be active and that when you're menstruating you're going out and you still have to continue on in life. But I mean, if I was asked, during that time of the month would I want to go to work, if I was going to get paid anyways without going into the office, I probably would say yes, I would rather just be paid and not have to go to the office at all. And I think a lot of women naturally feel that way. And some don't, and that's great. But I think, there are issues with segregation, but it's also not so clear cut of it being a way of excluding women or making them feel less a part of the community and rather more of the identity and the ideas that the women in that society have.
And actually, that's not what the research was mostly about. Having that biological need should not exclude you from the mosque. I mean, it does exclude you from the prayer area, but it doesn't actually exclude you from the mosque. The mosque should be a community center. It should be a place where women can get together and meet with other women. There should be a place for the children to get together. This is going back. The whole point of this was to say that at the time of the Prophet, at the time of the Sahaba, women gathered at the mosque. They were given religious instruction at the mosque. They should be given the same opportunities they should be allowed to have these same opportunities. It's not to say, when I started this research, I didn't do it in a sense to say that, oh, all the mosque doors should be open and women should be running into the mosques and taking control. It was more, why are there no classes for women, especially in the area that particularly the area I live in? I'm so connected with the different women in my area. We're very connected to each other. Like you said, women tend to find each other, but yet we can't go to our mosque leadership when we need help. We have to turn towards each other for help. And like you said, men have a bigger responsibility in Islam, and not only just to their wives and their daughters, but they have a responsibility to women in the community in general. So not having access to the mosque limits so many women to some of the things that they need. This research wasn't just about, a woman's ability to go to the mosque to pray. That was just one aspect of it, but it was also the social services a mosque is supposed to provide for women. And I was able to find mosques that are providing those services. There's mosques in Houston, there's mosques in California, there's mosques in Michigan that are providing the services that were initially set up for these different activities. But especially if you look at the Clear Lake Mosque, I think it's the Clear Lake Mosque in Houston, they have separate kitchens, one for men, one for women. Women can gather there. They have a chaplain just for, they have someone just for women to talk to. They have one just for men. It's the same. There's a mosque in Diamond Bar, California with the same activities. These are the things that women need mostly from their mosques. It's not so much the prayer area, but it's the social support that people used to get at the time of the Prophet. And it's the things that you're promised in Islam, like when you're questioning your faith, where do you turn to? You turn to your spiritual leader. So having access to a mosque is really important for that aspect. And so many of the women that I've talked to don't even know how to contact their imams. And that is the thing that we should be really worried about. But again, I don't want to dissuade anyone from Islam because there are so many resources and women are joining together and they are finding ways to find these resources. There's so many options online now. There's opportunities like this podcast for us to talk to each other. Sisters like you, Nawal, that have knowledge and information that they can turn to. So it's not a void anymore.
Can I step in there and just ask a question? I just want to explain my experience with mosques in Australia, which is a Western context. So it really depends, as you said, it really depends on who's running the mosques. So you have two types of mosques. You have the cultural, or the mosque which is like following a nationality. It could be like the Pakistani mosque, or it could be the Egyptian mosque, or it could be the Indonesian mosque. And then the other type of mosque is the mixed mosque, which is the one that I grew up with when I started my Islam. And that was a one mosque town with 1,000 people coming on Friday. And so you've got a mix of all the cultures. And from my travels around Australia, this was the feeling that I got, was that the mixed mosques were catering for the women. They had their own areas, they had everything for them, and they had their opportunities. Whereas the mosques which were for a nationality, maybe these ones were following a more cultural style of Islam. So it all depends on how the mosques are set up. So Kadija, from your research, did you feel that there are enough of these mosques which do cater for women?
Actually, that's exactly what my research showed, was the mosque that I talked about in Houston and the mosque that I talked about in California. They're open to many different nationalities and many different groups of people. They're open to all groups of people, and they're the ones that tend to be have the access for women, where it's the ones that are very cultural, that are very are run by nationalities that do tend to shut out women. The one that I found that was most exclusionary was linked, didn't even use the English language at their mosque.
So I do want to mention this because, as I said, I grew up in a mosque that was pretty inclusive. But, for example, my aunt, the one who most of my life raised me, she's pretty conservative, and she grew up in a culture where women were not heard, not seen. And it was just, that was the way she was raised. And when she grew up and obviously moved to the US, her ideas never changed. And she knew it was Islamically allowed for women to go out and do all of these things, but she never really wanted to be a part of it. We can say it was cultural conditioning. We can also say maybe it was her own opinion. But I do feel like a lot of the mosques and communities that don't really have inclusion of women, they don't have it because there is a social network outside of the mosque that women have built long before the mosque kind of dynamic. And I definitely noticed that with her. She always had friends that she could rely on. She had people that she could seek advice from. She had, everything that Kadija is talking about in a mosque that you should have, but she had it with a women's circle, and they liked it that way. They didn't really want it to be outside of that context of their little group of women, and they didn't want it to be involved with the mosque either. And so I do think that yes, there are communities that find this very problematic and where women would like to be included in the mosque, but there's also certain communities that feel very comfortable with the system that they have. And when it goes back to the topic of during the time of the Prophet, well, yes, but also we have to think of what was the context of that community. Were they always very open to having women and men together? Was there a lot of assistance for women where their families helped them with the upbringing of the children? And was the mosque also used as a way of kind of, getting the news of the community that you were living in? Because we also have to remember, now we live in communities of thousands and thousands of people in this very small area, and some of them are Muslim, some of them are not Muslim, whereas before it would kind of be like you would have a tribe and you would live with that tribe most of your life. I mean, it was very rare for you to have any separation from that tribe. So for me, at least historically, it makes sense why women were much more involved, and why in certain communities now they're not as involved, because they already have a support system outside of their community. I definitely can see a lot of convert women, or women who are not a part of that ethnicity, having these difficulties in those types of areas because they feel excluded, or they don't have a relationship because of the language and things like that. But I do think that community is very universal. Actually, I would say in the Western world, it's less common to find community, at least in my own experience, in comparison to a lot of the Eastern cultures where there's a stronger sense of community, but maybe it's not the type of community that we're accustomed to. It's more of a kind of inner community, and it might be outside of a community built related building. So I do want to mention that. And that doesn't mean that, that it's okay to exclude women or not have space for them. But I just want to bring that perspective, because it's not from a place of oppression. Maybe for some of the communities it is, where women are adamantly saying, yeah, I want to go to the mosque, but I think for a lot of other communities, it's just because culturally there's different systems set up. Another thing I do want to mention, and I mentioned this to you before, Adee, is that as Westerners, we have a very different idea of what our expectations are from a community. So, for example, in the 10 years that I lived in the Middle East, your neighbors would know everything about you. They would know when you went out, what who you talk to, who comes to your home. They would even, felt very open to criticize you or to offer their opinion on what they think you should be doing in your life, or the way you should be dressing, or the way you should be working, or whatever else, because there was that openness, and everyone views community so differently. But then also during the worst of times, those communities, for me as a Westerner, obviously it was very shocking to have someone say to me, oh, you shouldn't be doing this or shouldn't be doing that, because here in the West, we kind of keep our opinions to ourselves. But then during the worst of times, I noticed that there was such a strong sense of support where, if my household was going through something, or if I had difficulties, my neighbors were there for me in a much more supportive way than I have ever felt in the Western culture. So I think we need to also take that into context, that we have different ideas of what community is. I have felt often that, in the Western culture, because we're not very open to having people interfere with our life, it can be sometimes a little problematic for us to relate to a community that is foreign, because we might not like the intrusion of other people's opinions and other people's ways of helping even in our life. And it goes the same way for them. They don't like certain things that we do. I have met many Eastern people who have said that they find Americans, for example, specifically, very selfish and very non-supportive and non-family oriented and non-community oriented, because we think very differently about what it means to help a community and how to support a community than they do. So I do think it goes both ways. And I think that's why a lot of mixed mosques do much better, because they really hit what it means for our Western perspective of a community and our Western perspective of the type of support we need, in comparison to a lot of Eastern cultural mosques that have their own way of doing things.
I think you're absolutely correct, Nawal. And I think that's one thing that we do need to recognize, is that there's a lot of parts of Western culture that do go against Islam. And this idea of individualism is one of the things that does go against Islam completely. We are responsible for our brothers and sisters. We are responsible for our neighbors. We are responsible for our family members. I think one of the most beautiful things about Islam is that we are not supposed to cut off family members. I mean, that's a very common practice here in the West, is if someone hurts you, you just cut them out of your life. Like, they don't even matter. And Islam completely forbids that practice. That's not something that you're even allowed to do. For anyone that doesn't know, I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to be best friends with them, but you're not supposed to cut ties, especially with your family. It's forbidden in Islam. And what especially I found in this research, talking to the different Muslims around the country, because I talked to over 20 Muslim women, even though only 17 participated in my research, was that it's not so much the older Muslim women who were able to establish their communities, it's more their children, because the children are going to the public schools and identifying with their Muslim communities, when they do get to college, they have their MSAs, but it's in the meantime. And that's where they really need that sense of community. And that's where a lot of us draw together is we do create those groups for our daughters and our sons. I mean, we work together to create those communities for our sons too. But that's one of the opportunities, because you're right, we did used to live in tribes. And but even in this country, only 50 years ago, we were connected to each other. It's only been in the last 50 years that this sort of individualism has become so popular. And like you said, men need to go to the mosque to build relationships. We need relationships. And that's why having access to the mosque for all people, men, women, and children, is especially important. I just happen to focus on women in this study.
Thanks, Kadija. So let's focus on solutions now. So I want to give my advice to our listeners out there, and the ones that, they want to get involved in a mosque, they want a community, maybe they have children, they want to be around Muslims. So my advice is to find a mosque which is mixed, all right? You have to do some research, actually get your feet in there and see what's happening. But, it's going to be worthwhile just to find the ones which are mixed, which have all the activities for women. And then you might be better off moving close to one. If you have to move, if there's not one close to you, you might have to just move, if you really want this. So that's the first point of social networking. The second point of spiritual guidance, if you can't get it from the mosque, then you're just going to have to get it online. And these days it's very easy. Everyone knows about what's happening now. And so get it online, or try and find some women groups. Now, the third point, social safety, a social safety net. This is what I'm not sure about. So maybe Nawal or Kadija, you can explain what is the solution here for, someone that can't get involved with the mosque. How can they figure out their Islamic social safety net?
My research showed that Muslims tend not to trust Western governments. They have a good reason not to trust Western governments, but we need to start participating. Just as Muslims, we need to be involved. We need to be involved more socially. We need to become therapists. We need to raise our children to not just become doctors and engineers, but we also need to raise them to be social workers and therapists. And like you said, Nawal, you work in the health as a health advisor, I believe, in those kind of fields, so that our children can see different kinds of activities. The thing that I'm an economics major, but the thing I plan on going, the field I plan on going into is working in a healthcare clinic, so that Muslim women have a place to find resources, especially when it comes to finding healthcare resources and or domestic violence resources. These things need to be available. And if the mosques aren't willing to do it, then women need to stand up and create these resources for different Muslims.
So I personally would advise people who are really looking for a Muslim community. There are communities outside of mosques also available through educational institutions. I know there's a bunch of institutions in England that offer classes. It's usually that they offer Islamic classes, but they also have meetings that they hold at different mosques around that area or at people's homes. There are a lot of kind of educational institutes or religious type leaders who are holding classes and have kind of these small communities that meet that standard of maybe what a lot of converts or Westerners are looking for. So definitely do talk to people and look outside of just the scope of just a mosque type of institution. The other thing that I would say is I think everyone is really different. And I think community, at least for me, in my perspective, it can be um, very varied for people. So, in my own experience, I currently live in a country where the Muslim community is very, very low. And the few people that I do know who are Muslim, they're mostly not religious or not practicing, or they are practicing, but it's to the point where they have excluded themselves from everyone who is non Muslim due to politics. So I have mostly come to accept that for me, community does not mean a religious type of foundation. I definitely have teachers from my years in university when I went to Islamic University and lived in the Middle East that I can connect with if I do need advice, if I do need assistance. I just make a call and I, will talk to them about my problems or get advice from them. I also, for my own spiritual guidance, I also have people who are non-Muslim that I refer to when it comes to just the inner state of how I feel or how I am dealing with something. And at other times, when it comes to understanding certain things about Islam and trying to make decisions and gaining knowledge, I also do, make a big effort to read on my own and research on my own. And alhamdulillah, like we live in a time that we have a lot of online classes available. We have a lot of online forums available. So, you can also use those for yourself as well. But subhanAllah, many years ago, I had the privilege of meeting someone named Amina Asilmi. She is, she was a really big figure here in the US. A lot of people know her as the woman who came up with the Eid stamp. But she was also many other things. And I remember her saying that I think she was living in Alabama or Georgia. I can't really remember where she was, but it was somewhere in the South. And she used to live in a community that was mostly elderly. I think she mentioned that she was living in a community that was elderly people, or that she was visiting a community that was mostly elderly people and they were non-Muslim. And she would cook for them every single week and go and drop off food at each of their houses. And that's kind of how she built her little community. And I definitely believe in that. I don't think religion is the only way of connecting with people. And I think that there's ways to fill in that gap of a religious connection if you don't have a community that you're very connected to. And so for me personally, in the country that I live in now, most of my friends are Orthodox Christians, but they're very practicing. And it really is helpful for me because during the year when they fast for Lent and Christmas and all these other, holidays that they have, I feel like there's a relationship there because I can understand them and relate to them because of my own experiences, Ramadan. And subhanAllah, like a couple of years ago, they actually for Eid did something really nice for me because they knew that I was all alone. And for me, that kind of became my community. And I do think that people, if they're living in an area where they don't have a Muslim community, that's also an option because at the end of the day, I think we're living in a time right now where anyone who is practicing anything is having difficulties because they feel so secluded. And so sometimes it's very useful to find people who may be just practicing Jews or practicing Christians or practicing Hindus, whatever they may be, and just connecting through that foundation of getting close to God and, holding on to your values and then trying to branch out for the other things. So that is just a proposal for those who really feel like they're struggling.
And Kadija, your thoughts on a solution on how to get around this problem that we have with some of our mosques?
Honestly, I think we should follow the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the rightly guided caliphs. They took advice from women. The mosques should take advice from women. If the women of the community feel like they should be part of the mosque, they should be listened to, and that should be accepted. And that, unfortunately, according to my study, is not what's happening. Most mosques in the United States, at least, do not have any women on their leadership boards. So while it's not necessary for a woman to go to the mosque 5 times a day to pray or even attend Jummah, if she doesn't have a voice at the table, she just can't be part of the community.
What are your thoughts on starting women-only mosques?
Personally, I disagree with it. It's not from the Sunnah. It's not from the Prophet. It's not something that was encouraged. I don't personally agree with it. I don't think that's the way that's the solution. Coming together, we should come together. We should create unity. My whole thing, again, when I was discussing with Nawal, bringing up the individualism, we are an ummah. We are a community of Muslims. So I think by starting a women's only mosque, we're only causing more disagreement. It's no different than a culture branching off and saying, I'm going to start an Egyptian mosque or a Pakistani mosque. It's like you said, the most successful mosques are the mosques where everyone comes together. So yeah, I totally disagree with that idea completely. We need to come together and we need to follow the practices of Islam.
Yeah, because it seems like, this cultural way of looking at things Islamically, it's not going to change very soon. So, what's the best thing for people to do, for those who are coming into Islam? What are your solutions? What are your tips and actions for, what people should do?
Like I said at the beginning, read a lot from books. I mean, get some information from the internet, but get books. Get books from reliable sources. Take classes from reliable teachers. Get your knowledge from reliable sources. That's what the women in the study do. That's what people of knowledge do. That's what the Quran commands us to do. Gain knowledge. Just continue to gain knowledge.
Okay, and Nawal, you mentioned earlier that you haven't even really contributed to the mosque as a woman, but you seem to be able to flourish.
Yeah, I grew up in a community where we did have a mixed mosque. I was really privileged to have that. I think for a lot of the women who were older than me when I was a kid, they really struggled because they felt like they didn't have much at the mosque. They didn't have any activities for them and whatnot. And, as kids, it was a little bit of a different experience because, we're kids. We can go on the men's side or the women's side and whatever, we're just kind of playing and, just there to kind of meet the other kids of the community. But we did have a prayer area for the women and they would come to pray and it was pretty common. But, there were times where it would be more busy and times where it would be less busy. So in Ramadan, it would usually be really, really busy. Like everyone would come with their kids and their families. But then out of Ramadan, it would be a little bit more quieter, maybe a little bit more busy on Saturdays and Sundays because there would be weekend school for the kids. But then during the week, generally, it would be more men. I definitely will say that when I got older, I didn't really feel that much of an exclusion because a lot of the women who were young adults when I was a kid had paved the way for us to have a girls' summer camp, or not just girls, actually, a Islamic summer camp, and they would have one for the boys and one for the girls, to have ski trips or to have like poetry nights at the mosque. And I do remember that there was one young sister specifically who was leading a lot of these things, and she did have a lot of struggles. But once I think once that generation, which was just, 8 or 9 years older than me, realized that they didn't have as much of a space for those things, they basically started holding a lot of those activities with more local institutions that were offering classes or offering things for young Muslims to learn about Islam. So at the end, it really did work out. I personally am I had my own journey of figuring things out for myself. And for that reason, leaving my community at 16 and moving to the Middle East, it was a huge change for me. And I really felt like I connected with Eastern values more than Western values, even when I was a child. So living there and having neighbors that I knew and having friends that I knew and families that I really deeply connected with and went to visit every week and, shared meals with every day, it really helped me to solidify my faith, my understanding of what I wanted for myself and for my own family and community. And it also gave me a different perspective of what a community can look like, because in the community that I grew up in the US, I would say that many Muslims that I was seeing at the mosque every day, when it would come to their personal life, they were not okay with any intrusion or advice or anyone interfering. Whereas in the Middle East, every person that you meet, they have something to say and they will say it to your face. And it's not from a place of being unkind, but rather to keep ever to basically be honest with you and also keep you in the loop about their own societal ideas of what what they think is right or what they share with each other. So
there's accountability in the Middle East that we lack here. I think that because I've spent time in the Middle East as well, and it's the thing that I notice. It's accountability that we just don't have here.
Yeah, I think it's accountability, but I think it's also the idea of the communities are much more connected in a way where your harm is our harm because you're a representative of this community too. And there's good things and bad things. There's definitely, I definitely faced a lot of stigma being from a household that was divorced. A lot of people look down on that there. And it was really difficult for me to assimilate because people could not remove the idea of my own parents and their failure in their marriage with me being a different person. But at the same end, on the same end, I also received a lot of support in other ways, in ways that I had never imagined for myself, where I truly felt like people were willing to sacrifice their life for me. And I did have that experience where I lived a part of the time there during the war, and people did do amazing things to really save my life, and I owe them everything for that. So it is a different type of mentality. And I think I flourished because I took the Western idea of what it means to be a Muslim and what it means to self-improve and be open to things. And then I took the Eastern values of community and I kind of mixed it up together. And then obviously based on where I lived, lived in the past and live now, I had to kind of find a balance between those things. So I am pretty removed from the Muslim community, I would say. I don't really, attend the mosque or have that many Muslim friends or Muslim people that I can rely on, which is unfortunately a bit sad. But I also do have a lot of people who, I would say are my family, and I really can relate to them, and they're not Muslim. So that's why I say I don't think it's necessary to have a Muslim community. I think it's just important to have a community because we're made to be social, and everyone has different varying degrees of being social and having a social support system.
Yeah. I just want to say your story is so beautiful, Nawal. I thank you so much for sharing, and I'm glad you've been able to do that. It's just, like I said, here in the United States, our daughters, they, with so much emphasis on the individuality, there is a lot of emphasis on finding your community now, and so having a place where they could gather is very helpful. And I'm so glad that you found a home where you feel community. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this.
So we didn't get to cover all of the topics which Kadija covered in her paper. Hopefully we can continue, maybe do another episode and finish off those other topics. But thank you so much, Kadija and Nawal, for joining us today.
Jazakallah khairan for having me. I do want to just say one thing, which is that my experience is obviously not everyone's experience, and I can understand people who are living in the US or Australia or England that they're looking for something different. And that's completely fine. I think everyone just has to find what works for them. But I just wanted to offer a different perspective because I do think a lot of people struggle with the concept of a community, especially when they're in an isolated place where there's only one other Muslim down the road. So, there are other ways as well to get around that.
That's right. Yeah, that's why I wanted to really bring that up, is because although we're giving advice about trying to find communities, you can see that Nawal has been able to find her community without having to go to the mosque. So I'll just repeat again, my final advice on this topic is to try and find a mosque and try and understand the difference between a mosque which is been set up on a nationality or a culture, and a mosque which is mixed, which is trying to cater for everyone and catering for the women as well. That could be the hard part when you first come to Islam. You might even have to move to get close to one. And then the point of seeking knowledge, spiritual guidance, if you can't get it from a mosque, then you're just going to have to get it online. You're going to have to find some women groups or find a teacher online. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been another episode of the Becoming Muslim podcast. If you have any questions or you would like to research this further, you can go to our website at untoislam.com. We also have a live Q&A session, and you can find the link there on our homepage. So I'll leave you with the greetings of peace and blessings, and may the blessings of God be on you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.